Hi, Damon. Nice to meet you, and thanks for taking the time. I appreciate you jumping from being on camera in the studio to this. It'll be a little more relaxed, I promise. Um, I've talked with APGA Tour CEO Ken Bentley a lot about creating opportunities for the tour and for its players. So, how important is this opportunity coming up here for their event at the Farmers Insurance Open on January 30th? That it's the first ever APGA Tour event to be broadcast on national television, and it's going to be on Golf Channel.
I think it's huge. It's exciting. There's a lot of buzz about it already. The fact that this tour, which is trying to open up pathways and opportunities for African Americans and other minorities, is wonderful to be able to be in front of television cameras, on a fantastic golf course that hosts the PGA Tour event annually and has hosted major championships like the U.S. Open. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity in this era that we're living in of trying to open up doors, and racial justice and equity and diversity and inclusion are I think at the forefront of the conversation around the country in many ways. This is a perfect example, I think, of that.
And you alluded to my next question. I was going to say golf has been something you've been around for a long time. I don't want to make you feel old, but Newsday, New York Times, Sports Illustrated, and you've been with Golf Channel since 2012. Just how have you seen the industry and the game really take these long overdue steps to make the game more inclusive, more diverse, excuse me, and what opportunity does it present for the game itself and its growth, whether it's with players and fans?
I think this is another huge step. I think it's no secret that golf kind of lagged behind the rest of the sports world in the 1960s and even back in the 1940s. You think about Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in baseball in 1947, and golf lagged well behind that. But I think golf is doing what it can to make up for it and to catch up and to be leaders in this area. And I think you're seeing, whether it's the PGA Tour or other governing bodies in the game, that this is top of mind, front and center. They want to do right by the game, and it's a game of honor. It's a game of doing the right thing, and I think that this is an outgrowth of that, an example of that. And I do think that the commissioner of the PGA Tour and the head of the PGA, the USGA, the RNA, Augusta National Golf Club, I believe these are conversations that are happening, and they're important conversations, and they're not just conversations, they're dollars behind it, and initiatives and things to bring the game to parts of the country and different communities that haven't been exposed to it, or exposed to it enough, or in long standing meaningful ways. And I do think that having a golf course with lots of African American players and minority players, and for folks that are maybe flipping around the channels and seeing that could be inspiring for a young person. It could be inspiring for a company to say, hey, you know what, I want to get behind this kid. And maybe there's a story or two that these companies catch wind of and say, you know what, I want to put my logo on that player's shirt because I like his story. I know this kid has overcome some things and is chasing the dream. So I think there's a lot of positive things that will happen from this broadcast later this month.
And speaking of that broadcast, you're going to be part of the broadcast team that includes Nota Begay and Doug Smith as well. So just how excited are you to work with those guys, for this, like we've been talking about, this first APGA Tour event to be broadcast on national television, and again, talking about opportunity and messaging, just what message does it showcase to people tuning in, and watching this broadcast?
A chance to hear new voices, see different faces. I think it's I've already spoken to Doug Smith on the phone. I know he's excited. I've texted Nota Begay this morning. He's excited. We're all jazzed and pumped for the opportunity. When it was first presented to me and I had this opportunity, I absolutely jumped on it. It's an honor to be a part of the broadcast, the first APGA event on television. It's just, there's so many things. I think, it's not just on the golf course, but it's the voices you'll hear. It's the fact that this is something that I think may become something that we see more regularly. This is the first of its kind, but it doesn't have to be the last of its kind. Maybe this is something that will happen a couple times a year or several times a year. I mean, who knows what's going to come of this? But to be able to tell some stories, which is what I love to do anyway, going back to my sports writing days, and I try to carry that into my television work as well. Who are these players, and to tell the stories, and to have a four-time PGA Tour winner in APGA, and Doug Smith, who chased the dream for many years and worked in the golf industry, doing club work and different things like that, and been in the equipment trucks around the country, and now is doing his own podcast and a part of this broadcast team. I think the folks at home will hopefully like what we have to say and enjoy seeing us bring a different perspective to a game that we all love.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, I know I personally I'm looking forward to it. You mentioned the storytelling, and it seems a lot of times athletes' stories aren't really known or shared until they reach that pinnacle. Until it's like, well, this person came out of nowhere. Here's his or her backstory. So, how important is it? And you touched on it a little earlier too, to tell the stories of these guys who are hustling, who maybe came from not the best financial or living situations growing up, and are going through this grind now, as opposed to they've already accomplished it. They're on the PGA tour. Now here's their story.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. One thing I've learned in covering athletes for as long as I have, and this is across sports, they don't always love talking about themselves, and they don't always feel comfortable sharing stories of the painful journey in many cases. You think about Willie Mack III, for example, who's in this field, who's someone with a fantastic amateur golfer in Michigan, who's been kind of bouncing around in the mini tours. And Ken Bentley, who you mentioned, was like kind of shocked to later find out that at one point he was living in his car and was kind of struggling week to week to find ways to continue to chase the dream. And at one point, Ken said to him, "Will you have to tell this story? People need to know these things." And those are the stories I think that people will be surprised to find out, just how, in many cases, much of a struggle it's been for some of these players who, maybe didn't come up through some of the traditional, golf stories that we're used to being, and maybe didn't have the background in the game, or the parents or the family that could afford a country club membership, or the different things that it takes to sustain the practice and the schedule and the equipment and the teaching professionals and the travel budget for tournaments. And I think it'll be fun to open up some eyes about some folks in a different part of the country that maybe love this game just as much as anybody, but their stories just aren't known. And it gives people at home a rooting interest. It gives corporate sponsors and companies a chance to say, "Wow, I want to back this young man in his pursuit, in his dream." So I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and to tell these stories. At the end of the day, our job as journalists is to tell the truth. What are the stories? What's going on in this game that so many people love to watch, love to play? And this just gives us additional stories to the great stories that already exist in so many different avenues of this game, in the pro game, in the amateur game, on the PGA Tour, on the LPGA Tour. And I think it's just one more kind of avenue to tell some great stories.
Yeah, of course. And in talking with Ken, I know even some of these golfers haven't had official club fittings until within the last year. And it's like, how are you going to be on a PGA tour if you've only gotten fitted for clubs, within the last year? And it's, I think it's just providing inspiration and showing that not every path is this direct path and everyone has the same opportunity. So I think that's kind of the very important thing with telling a lot of these players' stories is, the end goal is the same, but getting there isn't necessarily the same. So I definitely agree with that. And I guess finally too, how do we keep this momentum going here? We've talked about golf getting more diverse and more inclusive and more accepting and creating opportunities, which seems to be the big theme of this interview is opportunity. How do we keep it going and not just say, okay, this is a one-off broadcast and we're only going to, I'm not putting pressure on Golf Channel by any means, but it's not like we're only going to do one APGA tour event a year, but how do we keep the support and the opportunities, continued? 2022 just started. How do we keep it through the rest of this year, 23 and beyond?
It has to be important to everybody involved, and the stakeholders in the game, and the folks that make those decisions, and the corporate dollars, and the eyeballs, and the different kind of folks that will make those decisions in terms of what the folks at home will be able to consume. I think there's hopefully not going to be any kind of fatigue. That's one thing I'll just as someone who's been living this life and discussing these issues and doing a race and sports segment on Golf Channel. It's going to be up to the people to continue to keep this in the forefront. That if it's important enough to happen, on a wonderful weekend in San Diego in January, and we'll see how it goes and we'll see the stories that come out of it. But to keep the momentum going and to think that this is important enough of an aspect of professional golf, it's as important as, the highest level players in the game, and the folks that are chasing major championships, and the FedEx Cup dollars, and the season long race for the PGA Tour. I mean, I think these stories, these quieter stories, these lesser known stories, are just as powerful, are just as important, and are very important to the fabric of the game. And I think as golf continues to make these important steps in diversifying, it has to be a top of the agenda item, and not just for a couple of years, not just for a weekend, but going forward. And I think the game will be better for it. I think it's important that golf continues to reach out to communities that where the game isn't necessarily a part of their day-to-day language and discussion. But I think this is what can be a very important step in doing that, and it just has to continue to be top of mind to the folks that make those decisions on what we see week to week on television.
Of course, of course. Awesome. Well, that's all I had in terms of questions. Anything else about, APGA Tour, or, the event coming up at Farmers, the broadcast, anything maybe that we haven't talked about that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, just how exciting it is to be able to see these players compete on a golf course that the folks at home will say, "Oh yeah, that's where Tiger Woods won a U.S. Open," or "That's where I see the PGA Tour every year around this time of the season." You got football playoffs going on, and it's a time of the year where most of the country is cold and freezing, and looking forward to the warm weather. They'll be able to see some pretty pictures in a venue that has become kind of part and parcel of the West Coast swing on the PGA Tour, and what a great venue for these golfers to walk in the footsteps where the best in the world have. Use those driving range facilities and locker rooms, and test their game on a golf course where the best in the world do that. And what a wonderful and inspiring opportunity that is on so many levels.